Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elise Fry, and I am the Test Administration and Formative Assessment Specialist with USBE. I oversee the administration of the dual immersion test, which we now call the STAMP test, along with some of our other state tests. And today I'm joined by other members of our USBE team of representatives, and then some of our vendor partner representatives from Avant. They will be monitoring the chat and offering support as needed throughout the training. Just so that you're aware, this meeting is being recorded, so it will be available for future reference on the USBE Assessment YouTube channel. I will provide the link in the AD memo when it becomes available. The slide deck that I am using will also be shared through Midas for those who are registered as participants. So if there's something that you liked in the slides or would like to be able to reference later, you'll be able to do that right. You just go check back into Midas where you registered in a couple of days, and that will be posted as a PDF. If you aren't familiar with my trainings, I do build in question breaks just to better respond to your comments in the chat as we go through the sections. So if I see something in the chat, I might even respond with something like, we'll get to that information in a bit or something like that. But know that you're welcome to utilize the chat for questions as they pop into your mind, or you can wait until that specific section in case I already plan to cover that information. So with that, this afternoon, we are going to look at our Avant assessment website in a decent amount of detail. We'll briefly review accommodations, and we'll look at how to best prepare students and teachers for testing, the test process itself, and how to access your reporting. So that way you can train users in your LEA and share this information as needed with the audiences that you work with. General information to be aware of with the STAMP test. The Avant Assessment is our vendor partner who provides the standards-based measurement of proficiency assessment, or the STAMP test. USBE works with Avant to administer this assessment to all students in grades 3 through 9 who are enrolled in dual language immersion programs. The STAMP test evaluates a language learner's skills in reading, writing, listening, and speaking, or really any combination of those skills. It is also used to measure proficiency in various languages and can also be used to qualify for the seal of biliteracy. The separate components can be administered back to back or separately. Just be cognizant of the time allotment for testing if you're in a more secondary setting where it may take longer than a single class period to complete one of the skill sections. Be aware, though, that the reading component does need to be taken before the writing component, and the listening component must be taken before the speaking component. Okay. Each Avant STAMP test must also be completed within 90 days of its start date, but this actually shouldn't be an issue with us for USBE users because our window itself fits well within that 90-day time frame. This test does require headphones and a microphone to complete, so you'll want to ensure teachers have the appropriate tools and hardware compatible with their classroom's devices. The testing window this year is set to open on October 20th and close December 12th. Also, I feel it is imperative to point out that many holidays and other school activities that are related to these holidays tend to take place during this window. Okay, so please plan accordingly. Just like with other state assessments, the last week of the window should be reserved for your makeup students. It's not a general test administration time. And we encourage you to test early, and we'll actually talk a little bit more about that too as we go through. Okay, there will be more guidance regarding rostering coming, so watch for that from our assessment data specialist, Maureen Rushing. I've included her contact information on this slide for your reference, but just know that you'll want to ensure the appropriate DLI course codes are being used so that the students will roster for the appropriate set of tests. Okay, so that's all we're actually going to touch on with rostering today as it relates to the STAMP assessment. Avant has a website specific to our Utah contract. The URL at the bottom is what you'll want to bookmark. We will go through this pretty comprehensively today, but you'll want to carve out some time in your day to go through all of this information available so that you are familiar with it and can share it with the appropriate parties in your LEA or your schools. It's important to note that USBE has contracted with Avant for both the STAMP 4S and STAMP 4SE tests. But you may see these represented as the STAMP 2S and 2SE tests because grades 3 through 8 are only going to complete 2 of the 4 skills, hence the 2S. The S stands for skill. Okay, so most students are going to be tested on 2 skills. Ninth grade students will test all 4 skills, so the 4S. The difference in the 4S and the 4SE is the age groups they are designed for. The Stamp 4S test is designed for students who are older, meaning middle and high school students, and the Stamp 4SE test is for elementary age learners in grades 5 and lower, and is more developmentally and linguistically appropriate for them. Both tests are computer adaptive, though, and should adjust to the student's language level as they move through items. I also wanted to draw your attention to the pink button at the top of the website. Clicking that button will immediately take you to the contact information for Avant support. Here, you can fill out a form to request technical assistance, or if your issue requires an immediate response, I would encourage you to use their support number that's included there on the website as well. After that support button, the top of the website has a chart which gives you the information for each of the grades testing, as well as what skills will be tested, as well as the window of availability. When you click on the hyperlinks provided for those assessment sections, it will take you to the test taker guide for each of those sections. This is going to provide you with detailed information regarding that individual skill component. You can see here that I clicked on the 6th grade writing section, and the information on the site provides the number of prompts students should be prepared to respond to, their character limit, and the average time that I as a classroom proctor should plan for when it comes to that skills administration. There's also step-by-step guidance for the functionality of the system to guide me as the user through that testing experience. The next section of the website has a chart with all of the sample tests available. When you click on these sample tests for grades 6 through 9, before you can even begin, there's actually a set of test rules which will pop up. Lower grades are actually going to go right to the next piece, but I would still recommend reviewing these rules with your younger students as well, just so they're aware of the expectations, as these training test rules mirror the actual test administration rules. Note that no support materials or writing utensils are allowable during the test administration, nor is using any pre-created notes. Those lower grade students can immediately select their test component skill, but upper grades will read the rules and then select their test component. Another nuance to be aware of is that the upper grade sample tests will require them to complete the sample tests in the appropriate order. So doing this in one sitting would be helpful, as the sample test site isn't going to save your progress, okay? If you quit partway through and then restart, it's going to return you to the beginning of the sample test. You'll notice in this series of tests, the students must complete the reading test prior to the writing test. And with Avant's tests, the receptive skill is always tested prior to that productive skill. Also know, like with many training tests, responses are not going to be scored. So this is a very low stakes environment for students to work with the functionality of the system. Another FYI for writing, you may have to adjust your keyboard settings to include the special characters, which might be required for certain languages. Now I have a couple of item examples which will give you an idea of what assessment items are going to look like. Note that the instructions, question, and possible item responses are in English, while the item image is in the target language. This is expected behavior, so there's no need to reach out to USBE or Avant to have the items present in the target language. This is what we are expecting students to view. In this example, we see more of the item and its information appear in the target language, while the directions for the item selection appear in English. Again, expected behavior. The more experience your students have with these sample tests, the more comfortable they're going to be with the assessment experience. So make sure that they're working with these. Back on that landing page on the website, under the sample tests section, you'll see a section for schools and teachers. This houses links for the assessment technology guide, a headset guide, and a writing input guide. The assessment technology guide provides technical information relative to computers and networks to help prepare for using Avant's testing platform. You'll need to ensure that this information is distributed to both your network administrator as well as the personnel responsible for preparing and setting up your classroom devices or your labs. It's recommended to have an IT staff member available during testing just to help address any issues should they occur. This page links you to the service status page, where it will show real-time status, uptime, and any upcoming maintenance for the system. You can subscribe using your email address to receive notifications for when there are updates or changes in operation status. So I'd actually recommend if you're an LEA user or tech support for an LEA that you do that. This page also has a link to the technology check where you can ensure devices are working appropriately prior to testing. The technology check is a clickable checklist. And it just makes sure that your system is configured for assessment administration. You can see in that middle graphic that the top and bottom sections are green with illuminated check marks, but the center section requires me to do every test to ensure the device is working appropriately. And once those tests have been completed, the sections turn green and a banner appears at the top ensuring the device has passed that tech check. Okay. You'll also want to ensure that firewalls, proxy servers, and content filters are set to not proxy, filter, cache, or block any of the Avant domain names. There is a whitelist provided on the Tech Guide site. It's also important to note that the recommended bandwidth for each test taker is 200 kilobits per second for that upload-download speed. These items are required for each assessment device as well. So you'll want to consult with your assessment technology guide for any computer or tablet minimum requirements and ensure that computers are not affected by like power saving, screensaver, or any automated shutdown processes, which could affect test taking on the day that you get logged in. The guide also includes general browser requirements, which states it must allow cookies and JavaScript permissions that must be granted for the microphone, as well as browser extensions. The only exception for the browser extension is a Google input tool, okay? Again, I would encourage you to share this information with both your network administrator as well as the personnel responsible for preparing the devices for testing. USB headsets with microphones are recommended and need to be configured. There is a tech check you can conduct to ensure headsets are working as well. Along those same lines, if you ever receive a low mic or a volume error message, you might need to adjust the sound settings in the preferences on the individual device. When it comes to the writing section of the test, a virtual keyboard may need to be accessed for the special characters in the target language, and you'll just want to go through the information provided to see which languages require that virtual keyboard activation. Also important to know that Avant recommends disabling the Grammarly browser extension. Okay, if it's enabled on students' devices, it is going to interfere with virtual keyboards. Back to our technology guides. The headset guide button will take you to the information related to required headsets. Before testing, your tech personnel will need to configure headsets for each device. There's also guidance for how to adjust microphone levels, but it's important to note here, this functionality is limited to Mac and Windows devices. It's not possible to adjust microphone sensitivity with a Chrome device. So if you're experiencing issues when using a Chrome OS device, you'll actually need to go a little more old school with your troubleshooting and have students either switch headsets, speak louder, or physically move them closer to the microphone. Moving students to an area with less or no background noise might also be required if you end up in that situation. These are some high-level ways to troubleshoot any headset issues that you might experience. It usually goes without saying, but sometimes just unplugging and replugging in the headset fixes the issue, or also restarting your browser. Check the device settings for low volume or even if it's on mute, and ensure that the browser is set to allow for the mic access. If push comes to shove and these don't work for you, don't hesitate to reach out to Avant's help desk for further support. Since we're addressing some troubleshooting, it's important to let you know of a known issue with iPads and the playback feature. iPads used in an educational setting often have mobile device management or MDM restrictions, or like a screen time or content setting that can limit the playback of audio and video recordings in both Safari and Chrome browsers. So here are the main settings which could interfere. So this slide is specific to the screen time settings for the iPad. This slide is specific to the restrictions which might accompany the browser for the iPad. Again, these slides are going to be available for you in Midas in a couple of days. So don't worry about trying to like write all the notes down, or if you're taking pictures feverishly with your phone, it's totally fine, but you will have access to these if you need them. And this slide is specific to guided access or those MDM restrictions. Okay. Ultimately, if you're still having issues, swap browsers, check another student on that same device just to see if it's specific to the user, or use an unmanaged device altogether, which should alleviate any of those concerns with iPad use. The last tech guide link is the writing input guide. It has comprehensive information regarding keyboard requirements for the writing skill. For some languages, no keyboard is necessary, and the test will just include a character box where the appropriate symbols and accented letters are included and just can be clicked. I mentioned earlier, though, that other languages require a virtual keyboard to be loaded. So a standard keyboard is going to be used to type the characters corresponding to that virtual keyboard. Test takers are allowed to have a printed copy of that keyboard layout or use an on-screen keyboard during the test. This is actually the only exception that is made to the no paper rule for Avant testing, but remember that students shouldn't have access to pens or pencils, okay? With that, we're going to take a quick question break. I noticed that there were things coming into the chat, and I believe that Roger has responded to all of them. Thank you so much, Roger. I appreciate it. But does anyone need further information regarding sample tests or technology setup? Those two things specifically. Ben, I don't know them off the top of my head when it comes to the languages that require the virtual keyboard, but they are listed in that guide. Harrison, is the test administration on an open browser, secure browser? It is open, but it will not allow students to click off of it without it closing. Ben, the guide is on the Avant URL. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Roger. Roger just dropped it in the chat. It's also included on the slide, and these will be put into Midas, and you can access them if you need them. Any other questions related to sample tests or technology setup? Alicia, they can take practice sample tests every single day if you want them to, multiple times. It's unlimited. Scott, I'm not sure about if the headset volume can be adjusted within the test or only prior. Roger, can you help me with that one?
Yeah, I'll unmute here. So be a little a little quicker with
Thanks.
some of these. Let's see here. No need to unblock you. Oh, YouTube. Let's see. How did that one come up? I'm not sure. Was that regarding the iPad? Let's see. Sarai, can they listen to the audio and correct their work? They can listen to the audio. They can delete the audio one time and re-record one time uh, per prompt. So if they're in the younger grades, they'll have two prompts that they'll respond to. They can listen, delete if needed, and then re-record one time on each of those prompts. On the iPad, if that's, let's see. So Cindy, if that's the guidance with YouTube on the iPad, then I would follow that. I'm not as personally not as aware on that part. Headset volume, yeah, the headset volume you can adjust while you're testing. Access the results of the tests. You'll have a code where you'll go into a website and you'll enter in the results code to be able to view.
And we have a whole section on reporting. We're not there yet. Right. Keep your questions to sample tests and tech setup. Promise we will get to those.
Let's see, and then Sarai, can they always check if the audio works? I'm not sure that I fully understand, but
So
there,
I will show you what checks are in place when we look
yeah,
at the student experience.
yeah, and there
Again,
are,
we will get to those.
yeah.
Let's stay specific to how to access and your technology setup.
Let's see, and then A Wallace, there is a headset guide on the page that will walk through all of that. Okay, and then Alexandra will get to that. Okay, is that everything, Elise?
I think so.
Okay.
All right. If something else comes up from what we've previously discussed, you can drop that in the chat as well. So the next section of the website tour focuses on preparing for the test itself. So you'll notice that there are many resources provided to ensure all users are comfortable with the process. We've already touched on the sample tests, so we're going to skip past that one to these video tutorials. Those two links bring up a collection of video guides that you can review with your students. Depending on the component, they range from about 1.5 minutes to 3 minutes. So they're not very long, but they pack a punch when it comes to the information and guidance they provide for you. The writing examples button provides examples and level descriptions, which can help students and teachers better understand what kind of language is going to be expected at each proficiency level. What's neat about these examples is they were produced by language learners, so they're authentic in that they may display errors, okay? The list on the left side of the screenshot will scroll to show other languages. So if you're looking at it wondering where Spanish or Portuguese are, they're there. They're just further down the list because it is alphabetized. The next button shares the rules which must be adhered to. These are the rules that are also mirrored for upper grades on the sample tests. The link here has a short video as well as a list of things which are not allowable during the assessment. So be sure to reference this with your teachers and your students. But I have an abbreviated list on the next slide. It also links to the test security and integrity section, which is also the next direct link button. So when it comes to proctoring, the proctor must have completed USBE's testing ethics training. Okay. It also cannot be a parent, guardian, or relative, or anyone with whom the student has a more personal relationship with. The use of dictionaries, textbooks, cell phones, papers, pens, other support materials, whether paper-based or electronic, are not allowed. Taking or using notes of any kind, again, whether digital or handwritten for any portion of the test, including the speaking and writing sections, is not allowed. Writing down a speaking response and using it as your recorded response could actually lower your score for that response, or you could get a 0 because it involves the use of paper or reference material. Okay, so be aware of that. Using an additional computer or any smartphone applications like Word, email, chat, translation aids, or having other browser windows open during the test is also not allowed. Students may not copy or paste or print the screen. They can't use any screen capture apps or tools. There's no video conferencing or messaging tools, with the exception of students who are in a remote learning situation, and we'll talk about that at the end. They shouldn't be taking pictures or videos with a phone or any other device. There should be no sharing information about test questions or prompts on the test with anyone, or communicating with anyone other than the proctor during that testing time. Receiving advice or help from anyone during the test, whether from another student or adult, is also not allowable. You'll also want to be sure students know that using violent, profane, or inappropriate language in their responses are going to automatically be scored as a 0, and there could be disciplinary action taken by the LEA. Those instances are reported back to USBE, and we do get in touch with the assessment director for your LEA when that occurs. Okay. We also recommend referring to your organization's policy on academic dishonesty. Avant provides further information regarding test security and academic integrity, which I've linked here for your reference. I would encourage you to review it along with other users in the field so you're all familiar with those expectations. The only way to ensure test content remains as secure as possible is to provide active human proctoring in real time. Okay. Also know that the Avant assessment system has security features embedded to safeguard the test. So for example, right click, the back button on the browser, copy, paste, those things are all disabled functionality once the student enters the testing experience. Off-page clicking is also recorded and tracked. And just as a little anecdote, this also occurs in the sample test environment. And I know this because it kicked me out many times when trying to get screenshots for this training. So just know it is going to even happen in the training environment, which is actually really helpful for your students so they become aware of what becomes allowable behavior and what is not allowable behavior. In addition to the rules outlined by Avant for stamp administration, USBE also again requires that all proctors complete the testing ethics training. The only materials provided to students should be the testing device, their testing ticket login information, and the headset. So that active proctoring, again, it's a must. So remind your proctors, they should be up and moving around the room constantly, okay? They shouldn't be sitting and reading or grading papers or some of those things that sometimes as a teacher we tend to do when things become more passive in our classrooms. If you have any questions regarding testing ethics, you can reach out to Scott Ross-Kelly, our testing and data coordinator, and he would be happy to answer any questions that you may have. The last button on the preparing for testing section of the website goes over the information regarding accommodations. So for students with disabilities, which would require accommodations, these should be first outlined in the student's IEP documentation. The accommodations used also should not alter the validity of their score or reliability and security of the test itself. So they should also mirror what's already happening in the classroom during instruction or other assignments and assessments. It's also important to understand that while some accommodations are appropriate for classroom instruction, they might not be appropriate during the administration of an assessment. Okay. Avant does not have any system that requires loading or applying a student's accommodations. Okay. And all accommodations are handled at the local level. If you have further questions, you can reach out to Jessica Wilhelm, our special education specialist who works with the STAMP assessment. If you have a student with a visual or hearing impairment, please also reach out to Jessica to discuss any other accessibility options which might be available. Or if you have a student who requires paper, you'll also want to reach out to her. Are there any questions regarding accommodations that you'd like more clarity on before we move forward? For what it's worth, we will actually be continuing guidance for test prep, but I just wanted to have just a specific brief moment for accommodations questions if it's needed. If it's not, we can just move on and continue with test prep. Dee, I would talk to your LEA assessment director on how to access your testing ethics training. Alicia, there will be more guidance later on how to mark students with opt-outs. Sorry, if they are in your dual immersion program, they will still just take the same test. It will be used like baseline. We will talk about timing later, Scott. All right, we are going to continue with test prep. So like with other assessments, there are different roles and responsibilities to be aware of so that the process runs as smoothly as possible. The primary testing coordinator works as the primary point of contact and overall coordinator. If this is you, you'll prepare your test groups within the allowable testing window and then provide support and instruction to your teachers and proctors. You'll need to distribute test codes and passwords to your proctors and ensure students know or have access to their SSIDs. So probably the most time-intensive responsibility is reviewing all of the accompanying documentation provided by the vendor for technology and proctoring. When it comes to the information for students, you'll want to familiarize yourself with the test taker guide and share it with your teachers to share with their students. When it comes to your responsibilities for support, think computer setup, login issues, basic test taking questions, things like that. The tech rep ensures that devices used for testing meet the technical requirements and that students have the necessary tools for testing. This person should be familiar with the Avant Assessment Technology Guide and complete the steps listed in that guide, including the configuration of headsets and activating appropriate character settings on the keyboard if students are testing in a character-based language. The teacher should be familiar with the user guides and resources provided on the website. They should also be familiar with the formatting and layout of the assessment itself. So they should take a sample test in the target language to build that familiarity. There's no limit, again, to how many sample tests a user can take. So I would encourage the usage to be incredibly liberal. It helps build that muscle memory for the system functionality. So teachers should go through that test taker guide with their students and discuss it with them as well. They'll want to complete any proctor prep prior to their testing days, and then be familiar with what testing day is going to look like and what will be required of them during that time. So your students should also have had some exposure to both the test taker guide and the sample test provided by Avant. When it comes to that test taker guide, though, please be aware of the nuances. Those are two separate links, one for the 4S test and one for the 4SE test. Your elementary students will be far better served if you ensure they're going through the appropriate test taker guide. It's also important to remember that only two of the components are required, so make sure you know which ones you are expected to administer. The only exception to this is ninth graders, where students will complete all four skill components. Something I want to bring your attention to, which our dual language immersion students have not had the ability to do in the past, is play back their speaking response before they submit it. Okay. That way, they can ensure the system has recorded their response. This is huge. Please make sure your students practice with this functionality prior to testing, because if they've taken the test we used previously, this functionality was not available to them. And this is going to be a game changer when it comes to N or R or UR tests, okay? Because if nothing is recorded, the student can hear that first and they can re-record their response. Okay. We are hoping that this new feature, this functionality, should really cut down on the number of NR or below novice scores, because they should have taken the opportunity to review what was going to be heard by the rater before it was even submitted for scoring. The next section on the website provides guidance needed during the test administration experience. You'll want to review the following resources for the respective tests you'll be administering to learn how to proctor the assessment and monitor progress and its scoring. Okay. With that, do you need answered any questions for prepping for the test? As a reminder, we're not done. We're going to be moving on to administration day guidance, the student experience, reporting, all of those things. But I want you to be able to get your questions answered in real time where it makes the most sense. So if you have questions about test prep, this is a great time for them. The slides, David, will be in Midas in a couple of days. Where you registered for this course, they will be listed there as a resource. Ben, 4SE students is for grades 5 and under. 4S is for 6 and older.
Let's see. So Stacy, there are directions in the or instructions in the target language before each section. And then with the writing and speaking prompts, they can hear the prompts in the testing language as well as read them in English.
And then Ashley, for clarity, yes, students will be able to listen to their recorded response before they submit it, or they can re-record it one time. They have the option to do it again. Ashley, if the second recording is no good, honestly, if nothing recorded, Roger can correct me if I'm wrong, but they would be recorded they would probably be graded as an NR, and you would be reissued a test for them anyway, if it didn't record anything. But understand, that's different than a student just breathing quietly into the microphone and not saying any words.
Correct.
Perfect, thank you.
Elisa's on top of all this stuff, you guys. She is amazing.
Any other test prep questions? Something comes up, drop it in. Don't be shy. The next portion of the website is for taking and administering the test. So the test taker profile guide provides guidance for how students will be logging into the system. The proctoring guide shares information regarding who can be a proctor and outlines their responsibilities before, during, and after testing. And we've already gone over the ones for before. Another neat feature of the website is the language translation option. For example, if I were to click here on the proctor guide for grades 6 through 9, this page opens. And if I want it to appear in a different language, I can actually use the translation button, which appears in the bottom right of my screen, to select one of the other options. I just wanted to take a quick second and hit on this functionality, as you may have teachers of a target language who are native speakers and would benefit from this functionality when they go to access the website. And we've hit on this already, but proctors should be school personnel who have no relation to the test taker. With some of our more rural LEAs, this may mean that a student needs to have their test proctored by someone who isn't their classroom teacher. Okay, the proctor's job is to verify students' identities and ensure academic integrity. And I'll mention it again: the use of dictionaries, textbooks, other electronic devices, paper, writing utensils, or other support materials, whether paper-based or electronic, are not allowable. The students' responses are meant to be spontaneous. Therefore, they're not allowed to write or type a speaking response prior to the test to read that as their recorded response. Okay. The reporting guide walks you through how to access the test once testing has been completed. This includes data filtering guidance, how to monitor test progress, scoring keys, information regarding composite scoring, group reports, and individual reports. And we're actually going to look at those in more detail later as well. Okay. Note that writing and speaking scores are typically available within 7 to 10 business days after testing completion. So prepare for that as you're scheduling testing. Those components are going to take longer to receive the scoring feedback. If you're waiting until the last part of the testing window, this could inhibit a student's opportunity to retake that skill if an NR is reported. Okay, because all makeup tests still have to be completed within our testing window. So since we've reached the taking the assessment section of the website, we're also going to focus on what proctors should be doing during this time. Okay, we've done a little bit at a high level, but I want to give a little more detail. Proctors need to stay with the students in the testing location. Okay, if there's an issue, there needs to be a communication plan in place for the teacher to message, whether it be an email, a text, or a phone call, a second roaming proctor for that assistance. Okay, our classroom teachers or proctors need to be actively proctoring. So they should be up and walking around the room, not sitting at a desk or reading a book. Whenever we receive reports regarding egregious academic integrity, our first question is always, what was the proctor doing during this time? And if a student was able to get away with behaviors for more than about 3 seconds, the proctor was generally seated or reading. Okay, proctors can help students when it comes to troubleshooting devices, logging in, or resuming a test that had already been started, but that's about it. They shouldn't be clarifying instructions. They shouldn't be giving guidance for the target language or anything like that. When it comes to troubleshooting a student device during testing, here are just a few things to think about. If the student is experiencing issues during the login process, please ensure that the student is on the class list and that they are entering the login test code and password accurately. This tends to fix most issues. Check the caps lock, okay? Things like that can also interfere. Or a space bar. Sometimes a kid will enter, 1, 2, 3, 4 and hit the space bar for their SSID, and it's counting the space as a character and it's incorrect. Okay. If a student is having issues during testing, like the page isn't loading or the audio is choppy, this is generally a bandwidth issue. So you'll want to check with your network administrator on that as well, if that becomes a problem. The student experience starts as most assessments do, with a login page. Students will need to navigate to this site, app.avantassessment.com/test. and enter the test code and password that you provide for them. This will prompt them to then start a new test or continue a test that they've already started previously. They will log in with their SSID. Also note that the appearance for 4S and 4SE experiences differ slightly. These profile screens will be pre-filled with all of the necessary information, so students don't need to enter it. As was mentioned before, when we were looking at the sample test, the upper grade students will also be shown the list of test rules. These should be reviewed with your students by the proctor before the students select the I understand button at the bottom. You may even want to review these rules with your students a few days in advance, so they're already familiar with what's going to be expected of them. But please still review them with your students on test day as well, okay? The students need to log in. Ben, is just their SSID. The students will then see the test components they're assigned to take. Note again the slight difference with the upper and lower grade screens. The upper grades lack the animals. You'll also see the certain components must be tested before other components. When it comes to these four, Avant does have suggested completion times, but know the test itself is not timed. And don't set a timer for them. Okay, it's not a timed assessment. So students are going to be finishing at varying times throughout your testing session. Okay, this gives you an idea of how long to plan for when scheduling those testing sessions, and it gives you an idea of what students will see and can expect when it comes to scoring. Note you'll need at least 20 minutes or so for each of the skills, and that reading and listening have immediate scoring available. This is a neat feature because the stamp test is adaptive in nature. It also is important to note that some of these come with limitations. For example, writing tests allow students to listen to the writing prompt twice, and they allow 2,500 characters, which equates to roughly 400 to 600 words. They can also only listen to a recording 2 times. Okay. For the speaking test, a student can listen to a prompt twice, and it is limited to about 3 minutes to respond. They can re-record if desired, but only once. They can also add to their response once if they would like to. So if I'm a student and I'm taking that test and I speak my response and I listen to it and I like it, but then I remember something else I want to say, instead of re-recording, I can click the add button, which you'll see in a little bit, and I can just add to the response that has already been included. Okay. With the adaptive nature of the stamp test, the difficulty of the test questions is going to adjust based on student responses. So unlike a fixed form test where all student responses are to the same test items, the stamp test tailors the test to the student's individual abilities. It begins by asking students to respond to an intermediate level question. And as students move through the test, the questions then adjust based on their skill level. It becomes more advanced or more novice, depending on the student's responses and the performance. This adaptive approach enhances measurement precision, and it improves the overall experience by hopefully keeping questions at an optimal level to ensure that there's more engagement throughout the assessment experience itself, as well as providing more targeted reporting to your teachers. Another element I want to touch on with the speaking portion of the test is one I briefly mentioned regarding the playback functionality. You'll notice here the student, regardless of which test they are taking, can listen to what was recorded and can add to what was previously recorded. If the student isn't satisfied with the response, they have the option to re-record it. But no, again, this is not unlimited. They get one re-record of that response. I also appreciate the little gauge, which will illuminate that little mic strength. This is something that we haven't had in the past as well, and it's going to give the student a much better idea of whether or not the device is picking up their audio. Okay, so train your students to look at that little gauge, because if that's bouncing up and down with our little red, yellow, and green lines, we know it's recording appropriately, and we want it to be more in that strong section than in the get help section. Okay. The reminders are also nice so that students remember to speak in the target language. Okay. It also reminds them to use complete sentences, say as much as they can. It even prompts them to listen to their recording before moving forward. This might be my very favorite functionality within the Avant stamp testing system, especially since it's something that has caused some frustration with some of our DLI users in the past with previous assessment systems. When students have completed their required components, it's going to look like this. They'll have those little check boxes and things will be grayed out and they can then log out of the system itself. Do we have any questions regarding proctoring expectations or student testing experience? Again, we're not done. We still have other things to discuss. But if you had any questions that have popped up that haven't been addressed yet in the chat, because Roger's fingers are going like crazy, which I appreciate, to answer those questions as they've come in. Once they move on and click next, can they go back and listen or re-record a previous item later on? Roger, can you respond to that? I'm not sure if they can go back. Is there a back arrow button?
There's not a back button. I would get that from my students sometimes, like in even like the reading or listening section, and I would just explain to them, no, in the spirit of proficiency, we do the best we can in the moment with the knowledge and skills we have, and we move forward. So in this type of instance, you'll just want to make sure that they are good with what they've recorded before they click submit.
Thank you. Will speaking any English result in a 0 when it comes to scoring?
I'm not an expert on scoring. I believe it's treated as like a period. Um, but it will not result in a 0 unless they only speak in English.
Harrison, codes will be provided to you. Yeah, Scott. So if they want to add to that response, they will need to click that add button before moving on.
And Callie, those will come with the student logins as well. Using cognates, Alexandra. You'll want to look at like Elise mentioned earlier, like the writing examples and the rubric. That'll give you a good guide with that. Let's see. Lonnie, yes, instructions ahead of each section are in both languages. Let's see, and then codes will be sent to the teachers of record.
Bonnie, when it comes to English answers in the target language too, I would encourage you to build familiarity with the sample test so that you can see what your students will see, because there will be English and there will be target language, and it's not the same. So build familiarity with the sample test so that you can see what it looks like. No, not everything is in the target language. If you remember the two questions that I showed you, one with the sombrero, one with the receipt, those had things that were in the target language, but the questions were in English. And on one of them, the item responses was in the target language, and the other one, the item responses were in English because the question was asking something specific.
Yeah, the elementary, excuse me, the tests for grades 3 through 5 are are bilingual assessments. So they'll see target language.
Any further clarity you would like on proctoring expectations or the student experience? As a spoiler alert, we're looking at results next. If that gauges where you're going to keep or ask your questions. Okay. So we're going to finish up today with accessing your reports. So in addition to the reporting guide, the website has a whole section dedicated to guidance regarding assessment results. The benchmark and rubric guide button takes you to explanations of the benchmark levels. Students will receive a benchmark level numeric score for each section of the test, and they are grouped by levels: novice, intermediate, and advanced. Within each of those levels, there are also 3 sub-levels: low, mid, and high, which are aligned to the ACTFL proficiency guidelines. It also provides more information regarding those levels, scores, and rubrics used for the writing and speaking components. There's also a section dedicated to the question topics, which shows topics typically associated with each of the benchmark levels. So for example, students reading or listening at novice proficiency are characterized by their reliance on learned phrases or basic vocabulary, things related to easy to talk about concepts like home, family, friends, routines, leisure activities, things like that. Where in contrast, students reading or listening at advanced proficiency can show understanding and use language for both straightforward and informational purposes. So this might relate to politics or current events, economics, or other more contemporary issues the student could be familiar with. The scaled score guide takes you to another page with 3 separate scoring guides. So from there, make sure you select the one associated with the test skill that you are administering. And lastly, in this section is the Power Up Guide, which will help you better determine what your students can do to improve their language proficiency. These guides outline just general skills or abilities at each level and suggest action that will help the test taker to attain higher levels of language proficiency. For users who will be accessing the students' reports, they will need to log in with their test code and password from their specific testing session. So each session is different, okay? Scoring is done using different benchmark levels I already discussed, and I've included those here for both of those test types. If a student receives an NR or not rateable, that component can be retaken, but it must be completed still within USBE's testing window. So this is again where you'll want to plan accordingly. Students need to be given enough time to complete the test and receive their score before the window closes on the off chance they end up needing to repeat one of the skills. Also note, it can take up to 7 to 10 business days to receive those scores. I've said it before and I'll say it again. The earlier you test, the better off you are. You may also encounter the test statuses shown here as you are monitoring testing progress. NS means the test has not been started or not started. IP means the test is in progress, but also hasn't been submitted for scoring. And then the SP means the test has been submitted for scoring, but isn't ready yet for like publishing into the site. For tests scored the NR or not rateable, you can work to contact Avant support with the login name used and the test code to have that reset for your student. Okay. Again, this is only allowable for the writing and speaking components and should be minimal, as students can and should review their recorded responses. Okay. It's important to also understand this NR score does not apply for tests which receive a 0 score. Okay. Tests which have been given a 0 have been flagged for a potential violation of rules, academic integrity, or contain language considered to be offensive or profane in nature. Tests receiving a 0 score cannot be reissued, reset, or retaken. Okay. More detailed information is provided in the stamp score policy section of the website, which I've linked onto this slide as well. But make sure you know the difference between an NR and a zero. NRs can be retaken. You'll just work with Avant support to have that reissued for you. You also no longer with this need to go through USBE. You can just work with Avant for that to move forward. Okay. But a zero score stands based on what was produced by the student. After logging in, you will also have access to the classroom results summary where you'll see the group's averages in each of the components, along with the average component score, and then the distribution of test takers and their levels. You can adjust the date range if necessary using the filters at the top, and even print or download from this screen as well. The default date range is going to be a 6-month period, so if more time has passed, you'll want to adjust that filter. If you opt to print anything, there are options there for the printing of reports, and you can also download test taker data into a CSV file. Your class list will look something like this, and you can view individual reports. You can sort the data using the arrows across the top. You can view all scores, the start and end date. Another feature that I really like that is provided here is you can even view the test duration, how long the student spent responding to items. When you select an individual student, you'll be able to view the specific test section details. With these drop-downs, you can view the individual scores for each of the sections and even view the students' responses. Just know that student responses to items are only going to be available for writing and speaking skills. You're not going to see them for the other components of the assessment. This gives you an idea of what that feature looks like. You can see the prompt provided in English on the left side of the screen. It reminds the student to respond in the target language, and then you can see the student's written response on the right side of the screen. Individual reports are going to differ from the group reports in that they provide information specific to the scores for that one student. So you'll get level descriptions for each component, as well as suggestions on what to practice to increase proficiency in that particular area. The last type of report you'll have available to you is the annual averages report. And from the research page on the site, you can click on this report to see the average score by test type. So either the SE or the 4S and its language. It's important to note that these reports are produced in November for the previous school year. It's also important to know that these are not available for every single language because the data has not been collected enough to provide the archived amount of reporting. And Roger can provide more information if I totally botched that. But that's about the annual averages report. With that, do we have any questions about reporting or anything else now that has come up to this point? Augustine, there are loads of videos that are linked on the website under the test taker guides. Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, so excuse me, Cindy. There will be a way for district personnel to view district data and for teachers with their codes to see their classroom data.
Actually, for the NR to be reset, you'll need to provide the student's SSID and the test code and password that were originally used.
Jessica, yes. As you go and look at the response, it will give a brief description, and then you can see the written response and you can listen to the spoken response. And then Ben, access to the system, I don't have that. It has to do with rostering and dates that all classes are set and all of that. So I can't respond to that today. Alexandra, I think there might still be, well, there might still be a zero score if they were to respond all in the wrong language. Um, but with that said, it is a lot more lenient with the test takers in those earlier grades. Let's see, the Dropbox codes for rostering. The rostering is being done in a different way. Yeah. Test code will be the same for the whole writing section. If they need to test over multiple days, yeah, they'll just log in and they'll click that they're resuming a test. Let's see, and then Scott, yes, those are available in the benchmarks and rubric guideline on our website. And then Thomas, there is a lot of similarities for testing outside of DLI. I'm happy to meet with you and your district to go over what that would look like, because there are some differences. Okay, Alexandra. Yes, there's a save feature for each section of the test. In writing, it will save after every keystroke, so it may just need a few seconds to catch up, but it saves automatically. There's not a save button, but it will save their progress automatically. And then Sarah, teachers will get the codes. Okay, is that everything?
I think so.
Okay.
If we missed you, put it back in the chat again. Roger, are codes going to be available for assessment directors as well?
Yes.
Okay. So Hal, my suggestion would be to get on those training tests, the sample tests, because that is the way that your teachers and your students can build familiarity with the functionality themselves. But as far as access to the Avant assessment system to get into the test, that is not currently available. Carolee, I have not heard of anything with that with this current system. When it comes to the speaking portion, like I mentioned a few times earlier, I would strongly encourage you to teach your students how to use the playback feature because then they'll know exactly what was heard by the device.
So is that question from Carolee, is that regarding like having a whole lot of people doing the speaking section all at the same time? If it is, you could just, what I would do would be use the sample test with students, having them all speak at the same time. If you're good to go in class ahead of time with a practice test or a sample test, then you'll be good to go on test day as well.
But in addition to that, if you encountered any issues or you noticed that there were some recording issues, that would be your big fat hint to limit your number of test takers at one time who are doing speaking and spread them out so that they are not picking up background information or not background information, background noise. Then we will communicate that as soon as we have it with our AD memo or meeting, depending on which week it is. Any other reporting questions before we move on to some other elements of the website that are available to you? If something comes up, we'll also hang around at the end to answer as many questions as you need. So back to the website. I'm not going to spend too much time on this next section of the website, but I would encourage you to go through it as there's lots of information provided for parents and for students. And it just goes through the process with preparing for the test, taking it, and other reporting information that might be helpful for our parent population as well as your student population. Okay, this is towards the very bottom. The last section of the website has links to frequently asked questions for each of the two assessments. So I would encourage you to look through these FAQs prior to contacting the Avant Help Desk or USBE, as many of your questions and even your teacher users questions are answered with these simple drop-down menus. This screenshot is truly just a small fraction of what is provided in those FAQs. So this is a really good place to go and look. Even if you don't have a question right now, this is a good place to go and just click to see what are other things that other people have asked to just get some feedback so that you can start to build your own background knowledge when it comes to using the system itself. Do you recommend we share this parent info with our students' families regardless, or wait for questions from parents? Ashley, that is a local decision. It's there so you can also pick and choose what might be more appropriate for your particular clientele and what you might want to keep for other questions, but that's entirely up to you. The resources are there for you to use, though. This next slide is just a quick at-a-glance list of important links to have at your fingertips and to become more familiar with. And I know that the URLs aren't there, but I did tell you that these slides will be provided for you so that you can go in and click on those at any time. But I've given you the Avant Utah webpage, the stamp technology check, accommodation information link, a link to the sample tests, a link to the test login page, which is the one which you will share with your students, as well as other helpful stamp information, including some video tutorials. Someone had asked for that as well. All here just on one slide. All of this is provided on the website in its particular section, but this is kind of just, again, like your quick at a glance, one-stop shop for those URLs so that you can bookmark them if you want to, or access them one at a time in an easier, more linear fashion than going through the website itself. When it comes to remote proctoring for the stamp test, it is only provided for students who are over the age of 13, and they must be receiving, again, absolutely all of their instruction, not just DLI instruction, but every single course they are registered to take in a remote or online environment. There are also additional steps which must be followed in order, because you have to order the Avant Proctor functionality for that remote administration piece. So note that the links that are in my screenshot here, they're not going to take you to the URLs because it's a screenshot. but I did extract those into the text on the slide. So you'll see those there. I've included those as links on the slide separately with that text. I've also linked Avant's information regarding remote proctoring as well as the remote student guide, which your online students will need to be familiar with prior to the administration of the stamp test in that remote setting if they are choosing to participate in that way. But again, this is only for students receiving 100% of their instruction in a remote or online setting. Even one in-person course, driver's ed, choir, whatever it is going to remove the option for them to test remotely. If your students are participating in a remote administration, this just gives you an idea of what their communication options look like with their testing proctor. There is a chat option, there is a screen share option. Okay, they can also contact support if it is necessary during their session. And with that, this is your slide of phone a friends. I've included our areas of expertise along with our contact information to make it easier for you to get your questions to the correct people. But just know if you reach out to any of us with a question that we don't specifically know because we don't work with that, we will get it directed to the correct people for you. But know that the stamp Avant Help Desk is available for any questions you might have regarding the system itself. Carl Bowman is our dual language immersion specialist. I work with test administration. Maureen Rushing handles rostering. Jessica Wilhelm can help you with accommodations questions, and Scott Ross Kelly can help you with any testing ethics questions. And with that, if you have other questions, we're happy to stay on for a solid 20 minutes because we've scheduled till 2:30. But if you are feeling like you're ready to spread your wings and fly on our Avant Assessment website and you want to go spend some time doing that, feel free to drop from the training recording. I appreciate your attendance. You're just wonderful users in the field, and I love that you are willing to take this on and to help other users in your LEAs as well. But again, if you have other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and myself, Roger, and other USBE personnel will be able to answer those. This video available to use with your teachers. Cindy, you are welcome to. It will be on the USBE website. But again, no, just like all of the other things, it might not always be applicable to a teacher user, but you're welcome to use any clips you find helpful from my recordings with your teachers if you'd like to. Ashley, the reason for changing to the new testing system, it was a contract decision. You could ask Carl Bowman if you want more information. Brooke, LEAs are over rostering, or will the state do it like Apple? We are still working on rostering, so we'll provide more information there. Sydney, I don't believe you're going to get an email with a test code to log into the Avant system. It's not going to come with like a welcome letter like you were used to. Roger, do you want to provide more
Yeah,
detail there?
there will be a Dropbox link that will come with all of that.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Camper, I'm not entirely sure because I don't work with Seal of Biliteracy. This is for dual language immersion for grades 3 through 9. You might want to reach out to Carl Bowman with that question. Alicia, your login information will be provided in that Dropbox, correct, Roger?
Correct.
Okay. Oh, Christina, that's a great question. Roger, I'm definitely going to need your help there. Is there guidance for second grade DLI teachers to prepare for stamp testing for?
I would just use the resources that are on the Utah website, like looking at the writing examples and the rubric, and doing activities that kind of mimic the types of things that they'll see on the test. So just again, becoming familiar with the sample test and then the resources on the website.
Thanks. Deja, a link to the certificate for training. Emily, how do they get their certificate for attending the training?
They don't necessarily get a certificate, but credit, relicensure points will be awarded in Midas. Today's Thursday, probably tomorrow or early next week.
That's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay.
So Deja, you'll be able to just find how many relicensure points were there, but it's not going to be a specific certificate. Any other questions? Brian, I will get Emily the slides and she will get them in Midas. I would guess tomorrow or early next week, Monday, Tuesday as well. Yep. When we do that, I also provide guidance in the AD memo on just like where to look. So be looking for that as well next week. Augustine, I'm not sure if USIMS will have it as well. I would assume that eventually those systems have to speak to each other, but I am not entirely sure. Alexandra, no time limit on the test sections. Yeah, to clarify though, for the speaking test, they are going to have like about a 3-minute timer, like time span. And that piece would be, I guess, considered timed, but they can use all of it or a piece of it. But with the other items, they can take as long as they choose to respond to those if needed. If they need, a little extra time for processing. For students to access the sample test, would you suggest telling them to go to avantassessment.com Utah and then just click their grade? Or is there a better way? Lauren, that is exactly what I would do. Or if you use like a website or an LMS system with your students, you can copy and paste that hyperlink onto like your class website or the LMS or into Canvas or something. So it just clicks them there. But that's entirely up to you. You're welcome to link to those sample tests in another place though. Any other questions? Or again, as I mentioned, if you are feeling confident with what's been shared, you are welcome to drop off the training, and we're happy to stay for any of the other questions though. With the speaking test given them 3 minutes to respond, will it benefit the student to speak for all 3 minutes rather than less? I'm going to do my best to answer this, Ashley, but Roger can correct me if something comes amiss. So I wouldn't say that speaking 3 minutes is going to make it any better or worse. It's the quality of the speech that they provide, because you can give a nice, detailed, and succinct answer in 30 seconds or less. You can also pause between many words and draw it out longer and longer. And I feel like that probably wouldn't warrant as high a score as one where a student is responding with confidence in a short period of time and it covers all details. But Roger, like I said, if I have misspoken, you can correct me.
No, I think you absolutely nailed it.
Okay, perfect. Yep, you're welcome. I guess I would also add to that, Ashley, just because a student can continue to talk, I wouldn't encourage them to do so, because if they were asked to like share information about a pet or something like that, if they then start talking about their aunt who lives in Indiana, it doesn't relate back to the item prompt. And so just because they are speaking clearly and beautifully, because it doesn't relate to the item, that could also hinder rating as well. So as long as it stays on topic and is clear and succinct, filling 3 minutes is not necessarily a good or bad thing. It can kind of go either way depending on what words they're choosing to use. Any other questions you'd like answered in the last 10 minutes? If there's not, you have 10 more minutes added back to your day. Oh, Roger's contact info sure wasn't on there. Roger, do you want to
Oh,
share, or do you want them to use the support at Avant
no, I'll put it in
email?
the chat here.
Okay. I feel like our questions are slowing in the chat. Yeah, actually, that
Yeah.
does make sense.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Ashley. Yeah. Do the best they can with what's there, but like you say, yeah, speak to something um that you
That
know
still
about,
relates to the prompt.
right?
As I mentioned just before, I think our questions are slowing. So Emily, go ahead. You can stop our recording. We can go ahead and end our Zoom. But again, don't hesitate to reach out to any of the contacts that are here on this last slide, and we will work to get these in Midas for you, as well as the recording posted onto YouTube so that you can reference it whenever you feel so inclined to do so. And again, thank you so much for your attendance. And Roger, thank you for your support in the chat. It is definitely appreciated.
Happy to
You are
be
so
here. Thank
welcome,
you.
friends.